Good evening. In this broadcast, the information program Time. For the first time in just over a month, we begin our broadcast not with events in Chechnya, but with the tragedy which occurred in Japan. Today, the most powerful earthquake in the last 47 years occurred there. 5 minutes ago, via satellite channels, we received a report from our personal correspondent in Tokyo, Andrei Kaloshin. Today, smoldering with flames and smoke was the Japanese port city Kobe, located in the region of Kansai, the second most significant and populated center of the country after Tokyo. The water disconnection and destroyed roads impeded the fire extinguishing, which flared up in 71 parts of the city. The earthquake, with a force of 7.2 on the Richter scale, occurred today at 14 minutes before 6 o'clock in the morning, 20 kilometers away, under the neighboring island of Asia in the interior sea of Japan. The earthquake destroyed not only homes in that area, but the transportation network, which Japan is so proud of. Stretches of highways collapsed, which were considered to be absolutely protected against natural disasters. Last year, when a similar catastrophe occurred in California, Japanese experts asserted that a similar thing could not occur in Japan. Now they will have to reassess the conditions of their roads here. Many stretches of the Shinkansen line has been destroyed for the first time in its history, which carries high-speed trains. Luckily, the tragedy occurred in the early morning, and the number of casualties on the road was only 14. To stop the train proceeding at a speed of more than 200 kilometers per hour with 1,300 passengers, a braking distance of 3 kilometers is required. This was the downtown part of Kobe just last summer. This city, so proud of its speedy advance into the 21st century, here a town of the future was built on a string of islands, and a futuristic train system was created. However, the earthquake revealed its weaknesses as well. So tens in percentage terms of construction of a typical Japanese quarter are comprised of wooden or frame homes, and they're also heated by kerosene stoves, hence the enormous number of fires. Shocking is the absence of firefighting helicopters, which could have localized the centers of fire. It's considered that the Japanese system of dealing with disasters is unparalleled, and this evidently is true. You see the disaster center in the prefecture of Kyoto, filmed not long before the earthquake. This prefecture also suffered from the quake. This center facilitates contact with all populated points and coordinates rescue efforts. The population is also well prepared. This is contributed to by the annual general national instruction sessions and special centers where anyone can, as they say, experience an earthquake and learn what to do in the event of underground tremors. And yet the country will have to again assess its readiness for catastrophes of this type. This year already several major earthquakes have occurred, and predictions regarding the fact that something similar could occur in the area of Tokyo as well do not cease. Now television is incessantly reporting the names of those casualties here, calls on the population to evacuate fire zones in areas with widespread destruction of homes because tremors still continue. By evening today, the city was still without electricity and was illuminated only by the fires and the automobile headlights. While I'm reporting, the number of casualties is already reaching 1,500 people. Many hundreds are still buried under the rubble of buildings. Let's remember Japan always helped us during natural disasters, and let us also help Japan in its hour of need. According to the very latest reports in the earthquake zone, 1,681 people were found dead, 6,334 injured. The search for 1,017 missing residents continues. In the Japanese city Kobe, which suffered most from today's earthquake, in the disaster area there were 60 Russians during the disaster. For now, HRTS has not been able to establish whether there are victims among them. As was reported over telephone in the Consulate General of Russia in Osaka, in Kobe there are 40 citizens of Russia residing. Among them are students, teachers, and permanent residents. Also that day, a delegation of 20 Russian oil company representatives from the Tumen Association Sib oil pipeline was there. After the earthquake, only the representatives of that delegation and one more Russian citizen permanently residing in Kobe managed to phone the consulate and say that they were well. Later, telephone contact with the city where fires continue to rage was severed and is not restored yet. Information about the destruction or damage of Russian ships not far from the coast of Japan during the earthquake was not received today. The President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, sent to the Prime Minister of Japan, Tomichi Murayama, a telegram expressing deep condolences in connection with the tragic repercussions of the earthquake. In Russia, it's noted in the telegram, we remember and value the fact that after the recent earthquake in the Kuril Islands, Japan was first to extend a helping hand. In the message, readiness of Russia is expressed to provide possible assistance in liquidating repercussions of the natural disaster. Japanese authorities have turned down Russia's proposal to help in liquidating repercussions of the earthquake. This, a correspondent of Vitor was told in the Ministry of Emergency Situations. A group of 30 professional rescuers of the Far Eastern Regional Center, equipped with all necessary technology, was quickly gathered together in the Khabarovsk area and was ready to fly there at any moment. However, in response to Russia's offer, the Japanese side today stated that it plans to manage with its own resources. Today, at the meeting of the Prime Minister of Russia, Viktor Chernomyrdin, with the delegation of the Chechen Republic, agreement was reached to stop the bloodshed on the basis of terminating combat activities. As was stated at a press conference by the Minister of Justice of the Chechen Republic, Usman Imayev, we may speak about the fact that from tomorrow evening there will be a ceasefire. As the press service of the government reported, the conversation of the Premier with Jahar Dudayev's representatives Talimaz Abubakarov and Usman Imayev was conducted on the instructions of Boris Yeltsin in the framework of a series of meetings with representatives of various social-political forces of the Chechen Republic. In conversation with Grozny's envoys, Viktor Chernomyrdin emphasized that Dudayev and his entourage have a last chance to prove their desire to reject further bloodshed and demonstrate a real ability to manage the situation. In the communiqué of the press service of the government, it's noted that the promise of a personal meeting with Chernomyrdin or guarantees of the political future for Dudayev was not received by his envoys. And here's how events developed in Grozny today. During the course of the day, Russian forces continued combat in Grozny, clearing certain areas of the city, and basic emphasis was placed on establishing the whereabouts of unlawful militarized groups. Measures were undertaken to liquidate them. According to reports of Vitor, information arrived that Dudayev supporters are attempting to drag the national movements in regions adjacent to Chechnya into provocational actions against the Russian army and the border troops, and at the same time, according to information being received, among Chechen authorities, there's a growing sense that Dudayev's actions are unlawful. Today, the independent newspaper reports details of the death of the 23-year-old son of Dudayev, Avlur, who died from injuries received in combat over Artgun. Currently, the epicenter of clashes, as previously, are the central quarters of the Chechen capital, where not only military continue to die, but peaceful residents as well. And the proposal of Viktor Chernomyrdin to immediately begin dialogues with all interested sides and forces of Chechnya, which was heard Monday on television, the residents of Grozny learned about through the radio and are waiting at least for a brief breathing space. The speech of the Russian premier became known to Chechen insurrectionists whose positions are adjacent to Grozny. However, several field commanders find nothing new in the position of the Russian premier, since, as they assert, that the Chechen side often suggested the path of dialogue before. The devastating blows of the Russian heavy artillery, in fact, have turned Grozny into ruins. However, while the Chechen militarized groups resist, the act of destruction of the city continues. But will the taking of Grozny resolve the Chechen problem? The problem is that after the first New Year's storming, the National Assembly, the Council of Clergy, leaders and elders in villages and centers of Chechnya decided to send forces of rebellion, then independent or even in opposition to Dudayev, to Grozny. The remaining part of the male population formed a vigilante force whose function is to fight crime, looting and violence. Tell me, please, currently there are the armed forces of Chechnya, there is an insurrection force and also vigilantes. Who are you? We are the armed people. We are rebels. We're insurrectionists. That is, you have organized forces? Yes. Currently, they're maintaining relative neutrality while the interests of their regions remain untouched. But the Russian transport vehicle, which happened to get lost, is not allowed passage. We're living in a stadium, a soccer field. Here, it's calm and peaceful. My mother died and many friends who were in the infantry. I'll tell you details at home. Possibly, if measures are not undertaken, the taking of Grozny for these people will be a signal for of the beginning of a partisan war in the entire territory territory of Chechnya. Together with federal forces in Grozny fulfilling specific orders is a group of law enforcement organs consisting of military units of the Internal Affairs of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia, special quick response units, regiments of special designation militia, the employees of the main center of enforcing punishment. The work in restoring lawfulness and law and order began immediately after the deployment of forces in the capital of Chechnya. Operational combat groups are combing the locale, residential quarters, industrial objects. Their aim is to locate gunmen, weapons, and ammunition arsenals. Special posts are guarding the major routes, ensuring safe passage for convoys of troops. Work is underway with the population to involve people in the process of maintaining law and order. This, as was stated in the group of the operational control of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Russian Federation in Grozny, this is the most paramount, but at the same time, the most complex task. As Interfax learned from informed sources, according to their data, on the 16th of January, losses among the Russian group in Chechnya are 550 dead and 1,860 injured. A significant number of troops are considered to be missing. To date, in the area of the deployment of Russian forces in Grozny, military servicemen continue to return who were involved in the initial combat for the city. They're emerging in small groups because they had been hiding in basements and destroyed houses for several days in areas controlled by gunmen. According to these soldiers, several injured soldiers are being sheltered in homes by Grozny residents. Ending in failure, today was the first attempt to exchange prisoners of war near the state farm Asinovsky of the Ochkhoy-Martanov region of Chechnya. Preliminary agreement on this exchange was achieved by the head of the administration of the Ochkhoy-Martanov region, Salamut Umalatov, and the general Ivan Chernych, commander of the detachments of the federal forces in that region. It was planned to exchange the captured soldier of the federal forces, the 19-year-old born in the Kemerovo district, Sergei Kuznetsov, who ended up in prison in Grozny on the 5th of January, with a resident of the Ochkhoy-Martanov area, the 17-year-old Shamil Bimiskhan. The exchange did not occur today, as Itartas reports, for technical reasons. However, hope remains that the exchange of prisoners of war will occur in the next few days. The complete control by federal forces over Grozny will be established next Saturday or Sunday, presumes the head of the department within the administration of the President of Russia on interaction with political parties and deputies of the Federal Assembly, Andrei Loginov. He stated that as this at a press conference in Moscow upon completion of his trip to Chechnya within an observing commission which controls the observance of the constitutional rights of the citizens on the territory of that republic. The topic of Chechnya today was focal during debates in Moscow at the opening of the 15th session of the Federative Council. It seems Russian senators in full measure decided to state that they do not intend to be passive observers of events occurring in Chechnya. 26 questions were included in the initial agenda. It's not surprising that given this volume of work, the Chechen item could have simply drowned, but it was decided to deal with it among the first items. The decision of the chamber was unstandard to invite into discussing the state of affairs in Chechnya. With a compulsory notification of non-attendance, the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, the Premier, Viktor Chernomyrdin, and also Oleg Lobov, Alexei Ilyushenko, Pavel Grachov, Viktor Yerin, and Sergei Stepashin. In such a categorical manner, the senators had not yet spoken with the head of state or the executive branch of government. For the first time, submitted for examination at the Federative Council was the issue of relieving Vladimir Shumeyka as the chairman of the chamber. Some of the senators are dissatisfied with the fact that Vladimir Shumeyka does not inform the chamber sufficiently about his role within the Security Council. The basic debates over regularizing the situation in the Northern Caucasus will be held tomorrow, but today in the chamber one could already hear completely constructive proposals. Each normal Russian surely wants order to exist in the country. And today, the intention of both the president and the government is to complete the withdrawal of the regular combat contingents from the operation. And this is quite a pleasant move. Speaking for the immediate cessation of combat in Chechnya was the Conciliatory Commission of Sergei Filatov. In the framework of that organ, currently task forces are at work to resolve the situation in Chechnya. Today, the agreement on social accord was joined by two more organizations, the Fund of Rasul Gamzatov, headed by the famous poet, and the Hierarchy of the Muslims in the central region of Russia. Its chairman, Ravil Gaynudin, in an interview to the program Time, confirmed the fear of many politicians that dragged into the Chechen war were not only the Chechens, but sympathizing Muslims of Russia and other countries, as was the case in Afghanistan. Yet one must not overestimate the factor of international pressure on Russia by the countries of the world of Islam. I don't think that other Islamic countries will be drawn into the war because they all recognize the fact that the Chechen Republic is a part and a republic within the framework of the Russian Federation. And there will be no open interference into the domestic affairs of the Russian Federation. But moral support and aid from the Mujaheds, including those from Afghanistan and Tajikistan, among the opposition, is possible. Unfortunately, at the meeting of the Conciliatory Commission, Ramazan Abdulabtipov could not be present. We learned from confidential sources that he, together with Sergei Shakray and the Deputy Minister on Nationalities Affairs, Vyacheslav Mikhailov, was conducting talks with representatives of Jahar Dudayev on ceasing combat activities. Sergei Filatov also announced at the meeting that Boris Yeltsin instructed Viktor Chernomyrdin to hold a meeting with representatives of the Mothers' Soldiers groups. Today, Viktor Chernomyrdin met with the directors of industrial companies and other business leaders of Chechnya. The meeting was held behind closed doors. As the agency RIA News reports, at the meeting they discussed preliminarily questions connected with restoring the business life of the republic, whose economy during the 3 years of Dudayev rule was almost fully destroyed. The director of the Federal Service of Counterintelligence, Sergei Stepashin, stated in Mozdok today that the whereabouts of Jahar Dudayev is not known precisely. He surmised that using underground channels and communications, which over the course of 3 years were created in Grozny, kept secret from federal forces, Dudayev is moving about the city. Sergei Stepashin says that the law enforcement structures have the task of detaining Jahar Dudayev, and what will happen next will be seen. Tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, into several parts of Grozny, armed formations of leaders of the anti-Dudayev opposition, Beslan Timirov and Umar Avturkhanov, will be brought in to Grozny, who will begin to clear the areas of gunmen, said Sergei Stepashin. The Islamic factor, as is known, occupies a noticeable spot in the Chechen crisis. At first glance, the impression is that religion plays an important role in Chechen actions. Almost each Chechen gunman swears an oath of allegiance to Allah and makes a secret promise to fight the occupiers even until his death. It's also known that on Dudayev's side, Muslims from other countries are fighting, and specifically, as was said many times, from Afghanistan and Jordan. To whom do they swear allegiance? Apparently to the Golden Calf, because services of foreign gunmen are paid for in large sums. But as is known, selfish gain and mercenariness are not part of dogmas of Islam. One must also consider the fact that located next to the Caucasus are such countries as Turkey, Azerbaijan, Iran, and of course Afghanistan, with tens of millions of Muslims residing in them. Many express their anger about what Russia is doing in Chechnya. In that connection, there is a fear, at least among our Democrats, that the confrontation with the Muslim world can be just as long and painful as the Cold War. And yet, overall, one may say that the Muslim world is somewhat sympathetic to the war of their fellow Muslims in Chechnya. Even if the separatist war of Chechens evokes sympathy, there's no serious help to count on. It's evident that the East is far more interested in quickly returning peace and order under the roof of the Russian house. Ethnic minorities live not only in Russia, and they say a bad example can be contagious. The Chechen issue was also discussed in Paris at the regular conference of the Commission on Large Europe. The problems of political and economic cooperation, ensuring security and stability on the continent, could not be discussed there without considering the events in Chechnya. The participants of the conference, as recently as done by many Western politicians, have emphasized their firm interest in preserving the territorial wholeness of Russia and again condemned Russia for the methods and measures used to achieve this. In arguing their positions on the Chechen problem, they were based mostly on the fact that Russia is a member of the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe and has undertaken obligations to observe the rights and liberties of humans and national minorities. This was indicated at a press conference by the President of the Commission, Jacques Chirac. Not wishing to support the internal and external opponents of Russian reforms, the Commission spoke out against the political and economic economic isolation of Russia, feeling that already sufficient measures of influence undertaken by the International Monetary Fund and the European Union. The President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, will address the members of the chambers of the Federal Assembly on the 9th of February. This was announced in a conversation with the press by the head of the administration of the head of state, Sergei Filatov. The address of Boris Yeltsin at the joint session of chambers was planned for the 11th of January. As is known, however, the developments of events in Chechnya necessitated a correction of the text of the address, and the date of its delivery was postponed to a later date. Today in the Kremlin, Boris Yeltsin met with Viktor Chernomyrdin. They discussed a broad circle of economic questions. They confirmed their position on maintaining the privatization course despite the individual opinions of certain cabinet minister members. The President and Premier also dealt with several budget issues. They examined measures to increase the budgetary revenues and discussed measures to activate the securities market. Boris Yeltsin and Viktor Chernomyrdin examined the drafts of several new decrees which would stimulate economic reform. A separate topic of the meeting was discussing the dialogue process in the Chechen Republic. They also exchanged views on several meetings held by the President and Premier with leaders of the factions of the State Duma, and also at the meeting they examined several cadre matters. The Russian government feels the moderately rigid financial policy is exhausted and intends to achieve macroeconomic stability mostly by stimulating investments and strict anti-inflationary measures. This was announced at a meeting of the Commons Chamber under the President of Russia, Yevgeny Yasin. According to the economics minister, on bank accounts of domestic companies currently there is up to as much as $30 billion, and now the process of transforming savings into investments should begin, especially into production. Yevgeny Yasin feels that lowering inflation by year-end to 1% per month will allow, in 1996 and 1997, to achieve steady stabilization of productivity and the renewal of economic growth. As the minister announced, for the end of February, there's a planned discussion in the government of a 3-year economic program which specifically provides for stimulating investments into highly effective and competitive productivities, strict budgetary policy, and the stoppage of inflation. The rate of the Russian ruble against the American dollar in trading at the Moscow interbank currency exchange today fell by 44 points compared to the session on Monday and was at 3,861 rubles for $1 American dollar. The overall economic decline in industry during the course of last year was 21%, and the volume of capital investment has decreased further by 27%. With these figures begins the draft decision of the Commission on Operational Questions on the preliminary results of industrial activity in 1994. The only thing which continues to grow is companies' debts to their creditors exceeding 147 trillion rubles and unemployment which has reached 12%. There was much data and figures prepared for the meeting of the Commission. The list of those reporting included 10 ministers alone. However, Alexis Kavets interrupted the planned order. Having heard the report from the chairman of Roscom Metallurgy, he suggested that the figures be put aside and that the Deputy Minister of the Economy and Finances should analyze the situation for them. There was an analysis, but few proposals. It was noted that industry's greatest problem is the decrease in payment-capable demand, and it's barely supported through export. The decrease in turnover funds impedes development of sectors, and the levels of taxes make any manufacturing senseless. The fuel transportation components are great contributors, and certain departments don't want to adopt cartel agreements to restrain prices. The coal sector alone promises a growth in prices of 70%. At the same time, according to the Minister of Roads and Transportation, similar agreements of the railway sector with the fuel sector allowed a savings in transportation of 400 billion rubles. The draft decision was adopted in principle. However, discussion through the sectors will continue at subsequent meetings. Russian automobile plants last year, unlike the 2 preceding years of reform, significantly reduced production of passenger vehicles because of problems with the sale of their goods and a shortage of funds to modernize manufacturing and the purchase of parts. According to the State Committee of Statistics, the number of vehicles produced was 789,000, which is 17% fewer than 1993, when their manufacturing in essence did not decline. And more news. One of the major Russian automobile plants, ZIL, is at a standstill. Today's difficulties at ZIL are a minute reflection of the problem of the entire Russian economy. The shrinking of markets because of collapse of units, mutual non-payments, unsuccessful privatization have brought the plant into a deep crisis. This time, ZIL stopped because of shortages of funds for parts. The average salary here is 250,000 rubles, and even this money is paid with delay. ZIL is enduring, I'll say openly, very difficult times. There could be major problems, strikes, anxiety. The plant was not helped by privatization. 26% of the stock was sold for only $4 million, when one press at the plant costs $15 million. The director, Valery Saikin, stated that the president may be faced with the dilemma of nationalizing the plant. The chairman of the board of ZIL, Alexander Vladislav, sees the solution in establishing large financial industrial groups. If ZIL manages to sell already manufactured cars, and there's an accumulation here of more than 1,000, the plant will resume work within a week. If we want to have a civilized society, we should adopt the slogan, "What's good for ZIL is good for Russia." Leading Russian banks are attempting to line up with their Western colleagues. Today, the board of directors of one of the largest banks of Russia, Onexim Bank, decided to increase its base capital to 1 trillion rubles. The 1 trillion rubles declared by Onexim Bank helps it to take its place among thousands of large banks of the world. Charges of involvement in the theft from the Russian National Library of manuscripts were made against the attorney Dmitry Kubovsky today, detained by Petersburg law enforcement organs the 20th of December last year. Itatas reports that arrest was chosen as the vehicle to pursue Yakubovsky. The American Secretary of State, Warren Christopher, arrived in Geneva today, where he will hold 2 days of talks with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Andrei Kozyrev. Their first round of discussions was held this evening. As Itatas learned, the conversation was held on a one-to-one basis without a translator or stenographer. Before departing for Geneva, Warren Christopher made several statements in Washington which help understand the aims of the Secretary of State at the talks. At the meeting with Douglas Hurd, Christopher said that Chechnya will be one of the main topics, and he will urge that the war be stopped and that the United States supports President Yeltsin. Answering Ostankino's question, the Secretary of State refuted the news that the summit in May in Moscow is a decided matter already. For now, there's only discussion. The massacre in Grozny ricochets off the administration. The larger number of victims, the more protests in Congress and questions. Is President Clinton on the right path in his foreign policy? Just a few days ago in Washington, stubborn rumors circulated that Christopher would lose his post. Now the rumors were dispelled, but in the Russian direction, the administration needs success, hopefully in the most difficult discussion, Russia and NATO. It's presumed that Christopher will attempt to neutralize the opposition of Moscow with new promises to consider its interests. Against are such politicians as Zbigniew Brzezinski and Senator Lugar. They say that the victory in the Cold War should be used to the fullest and move NATO's borders to the east. But it seems that the position of Strobe Talbot, Clinton's main advisor on Russia, remain strong. According to his convictions, an attempt to make Russia into an enemy could eventually lead to the fact that Russia truly will become that. To restore dialogue with Russians is the main objective of Christopher in Geneva, because relations with Russia is one of the few trump cards of the president in his confrontation with Congress, and therefore the arrival of Clinton in May in Moscow is more than likely. In May, the pre-election count will be reduced 2 months for him, and then success will be needed even more than today. Command of the Bosnian Serbs appealed to the UN leadership with a demand to end the violations of the 4-month ceasefire by the Muslim army. The Muslims to date have not yet withdrawn their forces from the demilitarized zone around Mount Igman near Sarajevo, and in the area of Bihać in western Bosnia for the 4th day they're launching local aggressive operations. The Serb command warned that it will use its right to self-defense if the UN forces don't convince the Muslims to observe the ceasefire. More clashes occurred on the western bank of the Jordan River. Participants of the Palestinian protest march against Israeli presence in that area stoned Israeli soldiers. The Israelis were forced to use weapons. As a result, 2 Palestinians were injured. The Pope of Rome, John Paul II, who is visiting Papua New Guinea, delivered a sermon before thousands in the capital of the country, Porto Moravi. The main part of the Mass was the glorification of the preacher Peter Torot, who was killed by the Japanese in 1944 in his prison cell because he would not renounce his faith. Soon he will be the first of the residents of the Oceania to be canonized. The famous Italian economist Lamberto Dini formed a new national government. This evening, he gave the President of the Republic, Oscar Luigi Scalfaro, a list of members of his cabinet. The Ministerial Council of Italy is formed of so-called technicians, that is, high-class professionals, who are not directly connected with any political party. The Prime Minister and the heir apparent of Kuwait, the Sheikh Saad al-Abdallah As-Salem As-Sabah, refuted the possibility of restoring any relations with the current Iraqi regime, which, according to him, continues to harbor aggressive expansionist intentions against Kuwait. In an interview to the newspaper Al-Watan on the day of the 4th anniversary of the beginning of the war to liberate the emirate from Iraqi occupation, the head of the Kuwaiti government placed on Baghdad historical responsibility for the schism of the Arab world enduring difficult times of separation as a result of the Iraqi aggression in Kuwait. 4 years ago, the United States and allies launched the first powerful missile bomb attack on all the basic military objects in Iraq. The Operation Desert Storm began. The air war lasted a little more than a month, the land war only 100 hours. On the 28th of February, everything was finished. Iraq was overcome, Kuwait was liberated. It was more of a television war, a shadow war, than a real war. Intelligent bombs decided everything. With complicated electronics, radar navigation systems. The military results of the Desert Storm were truly impressive. The mission was completed in just over a month, expenditures of less than $50 billion, losses around 200 people. And yet, in our times, there are no swift victories. War is a campaign into the unknown when you don't know what danger lies ahead of you. After the victorious Desert Storm operation, George Bush lost the White House. The head commander, Norman Schwarzkopf, retired. Saddam Hussein remained. Every war is a question of means and not ends, about the price, not intentions, about wisdom, not strength. History, in the final analysis, doesn't care whether any war operation was exemplary or completely mishandled. It only records the results in its tablets, and furthermore, history, unfortunately, teaches us that it teaches us nothing at all. We just received the announcement of the government of the Russian Federation in which it's emphasized that the crisis in the Chechen Republic has cast light on the most difficult problems of our nation. Today, the issue is not simply about the fate of a republic, but the fate of Russia as a whole. The government condemns any speculation on the tragic events in Chechnya, and that was the assessment of the decree of the President of Chuvastia, dated the 11th of January of this year, number 2, on protection for military personnel. By that decree, the President of Chuvastia not only violates the norms of the Constitution of Russia, but indirectly urges the residents of the Republic to not submit to their obligations while doing military service. The government of Russia calls on all leaders of organs of power of the Russian Federation to demonstrate wisdom and restraint, responsibility to provide help and support for the country to resolve the crisis on the territory of the Chechen Republic as soon as possible, an integral part of the Russian Federation, the salvation of the peaceful population and restoration of the destroyed industry. 50 years of victory. The first of the liberated European capitals was Warsaw. The 50th anniversary of that event was marked today. The memorial to the Soviet soldiers, wreaths from the President of the Republic of Poland, from Russia, Belarus, Ukraine. At the time of the People's Poland, this day was a common national and even international celebration. A holiday, a celebration of the inviolable Polish-Russian friendship. Later, when history was rewritten, new ideologies named the 17th of January, a black date, when the Hitler occupation was replaced, supposedly, by the Soviet occupation. Now, political passions have subsided, and today's half-century celebration went by as a day in memory of the soldiers who died in the Red Army and the Polish Army. Modestly and with dignity, the Warsaw residents paid due honor to those who laid down their lives in the battle for their city. In a few seconds, Anatoly Malyavin will tell you about the sports news. With this, I bid you farewell. Good evening. The first victories, the first surprises, and even sensations at the first tournament of the Grand Slam Series in Australia. The Russian tennis player Evgeny Kafelnikov, he, according to the statistics of Vitorta Sports, last year became a record holder of sorts in the number of games played, 171 matches. Evgeny began the tournament in Australia with a victory. With success at the tournament was Andrei Olkhovsky, Evgenia Manikova, and on the contrary, sensational losses of seeded players. This time, Goran Ivanišević, the Croat player, couldn't adapt to the aggressive game of Karl Washtup from Germany and was forced to lay down the racket. Lack of success accosted Boris Becker there from Germany. Among sensations, also the defeat of Gabriela Sabatini. The Argentinian lost to the American Mariana Verder. Unfortunately, our Alexander Volkov is also out of the tournament. Meanwhile, in the other hemisphere, yachts are raising their sails. After the postponed start because of strong storms, the yachts are out at sea. The American Cup, the oldest, most prestigious of all the sailing regattas. 2 victories apiece for the yachtsmen of New Zealand and Australia. In the men's company, for the first time, the only women's team, the Yacht American 3, also won one of the races. Today in Moscow, on the eve of the Ball for Olympians in the Kremlin, a traditional meeting occurred between the groups of the sports federations of the republics and territories of the Russian Federation. The results of the sports year successful for Russia were summarized by the president of the Russian Olympic Committee, Vitaly Smirnov. Tomorrow, the Olympians meet in the Kremlin. After heated confrontations and long strike and lockout, the NHL championships in shortened form begin the 20th of January. The hockey players had a cause for fight. Now, even the novices in the NHL are guaranteed salaries from $850,000 to $1 million a year. In the International Hockey League, the match of the Spartak Chemists for the spot in the final 8th brought victory to the Moscow hockey players 4-2. Snowboarding, a marvelous form of relaxation, supplemented the family of winter disciplines. The World Cup tournament in France, and a video clip followed by the weather report. Good evening. Cyclones, which are shifting along the Arctic coast, are sustaining relatively warm midwinter weather in the north of Russia. Tomorrow, another cyclone over the Barents Sea and the atmospheric front connected will bring to the Kola Peninsula, Karelia, the Nenis Autonomous District, the Arhangelsk District, and the Republic of Komi cloudy and windy weather with some snow on the coasts, blizzards. Temperatures 0-5 in the Murmansk area, as high as +3 in Komi, -7 to 12 degrees. In the Volgovets area, under the influence of an anticyclone near Kyiv, clear and cold weather is expected. Day temperatures -12 to 17. The weather of the northwestern region, Leningrad region, the Baltic countries will be defined by that same anticyclone. It will be mostly clear without precipitation. In the evening, in the Baltic countries, under the influence of an atmospheric front, wet snow is possible. Day temperatures 0-5. In the zone of the anticyclone with the center over Kyiv will be Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, the central and central Chernozem regions. On this broad territory, it's partly cloudy but without precipitation. Temperatures from -4 to 9 degrees. In the central and central Chernozem areas, -8 to 13. On the central and lower Volga in the Rostov district, it's variably cloudy with some brief periods of snow. During the day, -8 to 13. On the lower Volga, -3 to 8. In the Stavropol and Krasnodar-Rim areas in the republics of the Northern Caucasus, in the zone of an atmospheric front, cloudy with periods of snow with icy roads, and in the mountains, dangers of snowslide. Temperatures of -5 to 10. In Ossetia and Ingushetia, -2 to 7 degrees. In the Chechen Republic, at night, -5 to 10. During the day, -1 to 6 degrees. Beyond the Caucasus, cloudy with some periods of precipitation during the day, +1 to 6. In Armenia, around 0. In St. Petersburg, partly cloudy skies without precipitation. At night, -5 to 7. During the day, -3 to 5. In Moscow, also variably cloudy without much precipitation. At night, -12 to 14. During the day, -7 to 9 degrees. In this edition, we used information from the Oceanic Meteorological Center. All the best.